Today I'm going to be showing you how to create different values using a variety of art supplies. So the first one we're going to tackle is markers. Markers are a tricky drawing tool to make value with because unlike colored pencils or crayons, they don't get darker or lighter based on how hard you press down. So in order to create a light value, we're going to use a technique called stippling, which is where you create little dots to fill in a space. So if I make those dots kind of far apart, it's going to make it look like a light value. To use the same stippling technique to create a medium value, I'm going to make dots again very gently with my marker. Notice that you can't even hear it touching the paper because I'm pressing down softly. If I put those dots closer together, it's going to look like a medium value. And then for the very last value, I'm going to do stippling again, pressing down very gently, and I'm going to fill in my square with dots that are much closer together. Stippling is a technique that takes a little bit longer than other kinds of drawing techniques, but the results are really beautiful. It is worth the extra work because this technique adds a lot of detail to your artwork, and it's just something new and different that people don't use very often. So once I've filled in that whole box with dots that are much closer together, I have a darker value. Watercolor pencils work in a very similar way to regular colored pencils. Remember, the difference between a watercolor pencil and a regular colored pencil is that it has a little paintbrush on the side, and this lead is water soluble. So the same way that I would with a regular colored pencil, I'm going to press down very lightly to make a light value. Then I'm going to press down medium hard to make a medium value. And last, I'm going to press down really hard to get that dark value. Notice that I'm coloring with my pencil going in the same direction. That's going to give my artwork good craftsmanship because you can't tell which direction the pencil is going. Once I have all three of my values with just the watercolor pencil, then I can dip my brush into the water and paint over it to get that special watercolor pencil technique. If you were doing this on a final piece of artwork, you would want to let one color dry before you painted next to it. But since this is a value scale that I'm working on, I can go ahead and just paint the next one, since they're separate from each other. I'm painting on my tiptoes, which means that my brush, only the very bottom part is touching the paper. That way I can protect my brush and have more control over my artwork. And that is how you create different values with watercolor pencil. Creating different values with a pastel is pretty similar to colored pencils and crayons. I'm going to start with my lightest shade, and I'm going to create that by just pressing down very lightly. The next box, I'm going to do a medium shade. I'm going to create that by pressing down sort of medium hard. And then for the dark shade, I'm going to press down very hard to create the darkest shade possible. This will work with oil pastels or with chalk pastels. Creating different values with watercolors is a lot of fun. So the first step is to get your water into your mixing tray. For the lightest shade, you're going to add the most water. So I'm going to do about 3 paintbrushfuls of water. Then for the medium shade, you're just going to add a little bit of water. I'm just going to add 2. I'm going to take a little bit away. To take it away, you can take your brush that's already been dried out and scrape it onto your cup. Your brush is kind of like a sponge. So I've got about 3 paintbrushfuls in the light spot, about 1.5 paintbrushfuls in the medium spot, and then for the dark spot, I'm not going to put any extra water. The next step is to mix up the water in my watercolor tray. You can use any kind of watercolor tray. You can use this tray, or you can use the liquid watercolors. If you're using liquid watercolors, you don't need to mix any water into your paint since it's already mixed for you. So for the first step, I'm going to take the paint that I've mixed and just add it right into my mixing tray. For the second step, I'm going to take the paint that I've mixed up and add it to my medium shade. And then for the last one, I'm going to take that same paint and add it to the light shade. So now that I have the different shades mixed up, I can go ahead and paint it. Let's see how close I got it. So I'm going to start with the light shade. That's the one that has the most water mixed in. And as you can see, that all of that water made the paint much, much lighter. So that is a great looking light shade. Then I'm going to want to rinse my brush in between shades, or else I'm just going to not get the exact shade that I'm hoping for. Make sure you scrape the water out of your brush because that extra water would make your paint lighter. I'm going to go for the medium shade next. This is the one that just has a little bit of paint mixed in. Oh, and I can see that it's a little too light. These two look a little bit too much the same. So I'm going to just get a little bit of paint and add that paint directly onto my artwork. If I was doing a bigger painting, I would add a little more paint into my mixing tray so I had enough paint left over to finish all of the art. So that's a medium shade. And then I'm going to rinse out my brush, scrape off the extra paint. Since I had to add more paint to the last one, I'm going to go ahead and do that again with my dark shade. And I'm getting paint that doesn't have that much water in the paint tray because I think that will make my paint a little bit darker because the color is more concentrated. So then I'm going to take that dark shade and paint it onto my painting. And I am pretty happy with that. I'm putting a little extra paint in there to fill in the light spaces, and that's how you get a light, medium, and dark shade using watercolors. Creating different values with tempera paint is almost exactly the same process as doing it with watercolors. I'm going to start by adding the water into my mixing tray. I'm going to put 3 paintbrushfuls of water, maybe 4, into the light circle. I'm going to put 1 paintbrush full into the medium circle, maybe 1.5. A little bit of extra into the medium circle, and then I'm going to leave the dark circle empty. The next step is for me to make my tempera paint. The same way that you do it with watercolors, you're just going to add water to your tempera paint, and that's how you create the paint. So for the light circle, I'm going to add 1 paintbrush full and kind of mix it up. That lighter color comes from the fact that there's a lot of water mixed in with the paint. When I rinse my brush out, I'm going to scrape it off on the side so that I don't add too much water into my tempera paint. Then the same thing goes for the medium circle. I'm just going to add 1 paintbrush full. I'm remembering what happened when I created the watercolors, and that one was a little too light. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of extra color into the medium. And then for the dark, I am just going to do tempera paint without any water, extra water in the mixing tray. I'm gonna go ahead and start with the dark since I already have it. So once you have the color mixed up, you can just paint that right onto your value scale or your artwork. And then I'm gonna rinse out my brush in between values. And I'm gonna make sure that I scrape the extra water off of my brush so it doesn't mess up the mixture I've already made. I'm gonna stir the medium value and paint that. Oh, it's looking a little bit light. I might, after I paint the light one, I might decide to go back and add a little bit more color to the medium. I'm gonna scrape off that extra water, give my light mixture a stir, and then paint the light mixture. Oh, I guess it does have enough of a difference in between the light and the medium. If I wanted to make my medium just a little bit darker, I could always go back to my tempera paints, get just a little bit of extra paint, and add it in. And that's how you create light, medium, and dark values with tempera paint. Creating different values with acrylic paint is very different from doing it with watercolors or tempera paint because you don't use any water when you're painting with acrylic. You use water, but you only use it to rinse your brush, not to mix in with the paint. So I put some colors into my mixing tray. At your tables, you're gonna have a much bigger acrylic paint set that you can scoop colors out of and put them into your mixing tray. I'm gonna start with the light value, and for the light value, I'm gonna take a little bit of white and add it to my mixing tray for the light orange. Remember, in between colors, you always want to wash your brush really well. You don't wanna contaminate your paint tray with different colors. So I'm gonna scrape off that extra water, and then because we're using acrylics and I don't want extra water in my brush, I'm gonna dry my brush off on my paper towel, and then I'm gonna take a scoop of orange. I want more orange than white, since orange is the main color I'm going for, and I'm only using the white as a way of lightening the orange to create a lighter value. So then I'm gonna mix that white and orange together in my mixing tray. And it's not quite as light as I was hoping. So I'm gonna go back to my water cup. I'm gonna rinse out my brush. I'm gonna scrape off the water, and I'm gonna add some more white to my orange. And that looks like it's light enough. I just realized that I am using the wrong brush. This is a watercolor brush and I should be using an acrylic brush. So I'm gonna pause and come back with the right brush. Now I have the correct brush, so I'm gonna make my medium value next. And for the medium value, I am just gonna use the normal orange right out of the mixing tray. After I have the medium value, then I'm gonna make the dark value. For the dark value, I'm gonna scoop some orange, about the same amount, into the dark circle. And then I'm gonna rinse my brush out. It's a lot easier to rinse because it's the correct brush. I'm gonna scrape. Oh, I see a little bit more paint. I'm gonna scrape my brush clean, dry my brush off, get any extra paint that's stuck on the metal part. And then for dark colors, you don't want to use as much black as you used of the white. It's always easier to add a little bit more black, but it's really hard to get it taken out. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of black. I'm gonna mix and mix and mix. That created a very, very dark orange for me. So now I am ready to paint my value scale. I'm going to start with the dark orange since I already have it on my brush. I got a little bit too much paint, so I'm going to scrape a little off and then just get the bottom of my brush filled with paint. And I'm going to paint the dark square. I'm painting on the tiptoes of my brush, which means only that bottom part of my brush is touching the paper. That looks like a great dark orange. Then I'm going to rinse my brush out really well, since I don't want to make my medium shade darker with any leftover paint that's on my brush. I'm going to dry that brush off, clean off any extra bits of paint, and I'm going to start painting the medium value. That medium value is just the normal orange. If I see that my brush is starting to run out of paint, I can just refill it from my mixing tray. And there is my medium value. Then I'm ready for my light value. I'm rinsing my brush out really, really well. Scraping off the extra water. Drying my brush off on the paper towel because I don't want to water down my paint. I want it to be all color and no water. Then I'm going to get paint just on the bottom part of my brush again. And then I'm painting in that square only on the tiptoes of my paintbrush. And that is how you make light, medium, and dark values using acrylic paints. So I have finished creating all of these different values with a variety of different art supplies. I hope you'll use these techniques in your artwork, because truly having a variety of values in a piece of artwork is one of the things that really brings it to the next level. It adds detail, it makes your artwork more interesting, and honestly, it's a lot of fun.